All right, hey guys, today we're going to talk about the Cold War at home. And so you see the essential questions up here on the screen, and I'll read those. And as I'm going through the notes and the lecture, make sure you can answer them. So, what led some Americans to join the Communist Party in the 1940s? And how were actors discriminated against during this time? And at what point did the tide turn against Senator McCarthy? Okay, so we're going to start with a Cold War at home. So if you're following with your sheet, make sure you can fill that in. Okay, and I'll move it over a little bit so we can get it all. Okay, so it says in the U.S. during the Depression, many Americans who joined the Communist Party, they're going to become disillusioned with the American government and, the economic problems at home, and they lose their faith in the capitalist economy, which is understandable. So many are going to join the Communist Party. So you would write they had lost faith in capitalism. Joining the Communist Party was perfectly legal. Then when World War II came about, many members are going to leave the Communist Party. Seeing what's going on over in Europe kind of brings them back to reality, and they come back to support our capitalist economy. Most of them, not everyone, but most. Okay, so next is a blank loyalty review program. This is Truman's plan. Make sure you know it's Truman. And he ordered an investigation of federal employees to make sure they were loyal to the United States. So if you were a federal employee, you would have to go through a series of questions, oral questions and some written questions that were examined to see if you were a spy, basically. And this was kind of controversial and very scary for all the federal employees. Even if you didn't have anything to hide, it seemed like everyone mistrusted you that you worked for. It says those accused had very little chance of defending themselves. And you see here this growing suspicion of U.S. traders on home soil. And that's a huge part of this second Red Scare that I'm teaching you. Just a suspicion that everyone is a traitor. Okay, so make sure you have federal employees there in your blank with loyalty review. All right, now we're going to skip down to HUAC. HUAC stands for, and you can write, House Un-American Activities Committee. They investigated communist infiltration into the government and into Hollywood, believe it or not. At the time, lots of people now are watching movies and going to the cinema, and folks thought that Hollywood had a great impact on society. They still do. But there was also this belief that perhaps a lot of the folks in Hollywood had become commies, pinko commies, as they would say. So September 1947, you would fill in the blank Hollywood 10. Hollywood writers, directors, actors, lots of people involved in Hollywood are going to be called in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee. It's a House committee in the House of Representatives, and they are going to ask people this question: are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party? This group of 10 Hollywood actors, writers, directors are going to plead the Fifth Amendment, saying they're not going to be a witness against themselves, which implied they were actually guilty, and most of them are going to be sent to prison up to a year for failing to cooperate with government officials, and there were other charges that they were in fact communists. Okay, so keep in mind it was legal to be in the Communist Party, but this House Un-American Activities Committee just went a step further, violating these people's civil liberties, saying that national security was more important than civil rights. All right, so we're going to go on to the next page. Let me show you a couple of things before we do that. Here is loyalty review. This talks about what I was discussing with, that's not what I wanted to do, sorry. This talks about what I was discussing with the President, Truman, and it says established in early 47, screened all federal employees, confirmed fears that communists had in fact infiltrated our government, and it heightened fears during this time. So 6 million people were screened. That's kind of crazy. Here's HUAC. And I just wondered if you, obviously not all of them, but several of the members on the committee, wonder if you notice who this gentleman is. That would be Richard Milhous Nixon, later President Nixon. So I wanted to show you that. He was on HUAC, and that kind of becomes important later when we get to him and his presidency. Okay, I think we're caught up with that. So now let's go to the next page, and on your sheet it should have a blank. Studio circulated a list of actors, that's blacklists, and they listed these actors that were suspected communists. If you were on the list, you were not hired for a job. That's why it's called blacklist, because you were not allowed to work. And that was circulated around Hollywood, that you were not supposed to, if you're of an organization that hired actors, writers, directors, you know, a movie production company, you were not supposed to hire people on the blacklist. So you in fact have folks who cannot find work during this time. Again, not necessarily because of any concrete evidence that they're a communist. Okay, HUAC also investigates Alger Hiss, which I believe he's on your list, yes. So you need to write him in that blank. He had worked for the State Department, and he was convicted for spying against the United States government. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, I'm not going to go into much about them because you'll see those in your learning stations. Very interesting case. Communist Party members, they were executed in 1953 for passing atomic secrets to the Soviets during World War II. Please make sure you pay attention in that station and read up on them, because there's still some lingering questions about whether or not they were both guilty. Okay, so next is Red Scare. So it says this paranoia in America that communism was spreading throughout government officials and even Hollywood and other parts of our country becomes known as the Red Scare. And probably the #1 person who most personifies the Red Scare in America, I call it the second Red Scare here in America during this time, is Wisconsin, and you write Senator Joseph McCarthy. He is going to be a junior senator, and some would think as a power play to get attention, if you will, he stands up in the Senate and claims he has a list of 205, I should hold this up, a list of 205 suspected communists in the State Department, and he's going to name these people. Well, this brings about, oh gosh, I mean, hysteria that we have 205 communists working in our State Department, you know, our State Department who deals with foreign policy and other nations. So this becomes a fear tactic. He uses a witch hunt, so to speak, about these people. And it says those who were accused by him lost their jobs or reputations. McCarthyism becomes the term that's used here, and I believe that's your blank. Yes, a witch hunt, using smear tactics and fear to gain power, and that's what McCarthy did. Then he goes a little too far. Now, again, I'm not going to tell you his whole story. You'll see that in the learning station. But he accuses, in 1954, the Army now of being full of communists. And this really went too far. And there was no true evidence that pointed to this as fact. So he, in fact, was investigated. And this was put on national television and really ruined him personally. It says it was exposed that he was lying about the entire affair just to get attention. That's not to say that there weren't any communists in the United States during this time, because there were, but certainly not to the extent that McCarthy made it out to be in our high-level government officials. He is censured, which I believe is a blank, yes, by the Senate. If you remember from civics and economics, a censure is a formal disapproval. So it means to be stood up in front of the Senate and mocked or ridiculed, made fun of, harassed publicly as part of your punishment. Okay, so he was completely embarrassed through the whole ordeal. All right, Red Scare in everyday life. So another one I'm not going to tell you too much about because I don't want to give it away is duck and cover. So in school, students learned duck and cover, which was a system, here that is, which was a system like a drill, almost like our fire drill, or better yet, tornado drill, except they would get under their desks. And this would protect them in the event of an atomic blast occurring near their school. Fallout was radiation that was left behind. And so, because of our use of the atomic bomb in Nagasaki and Hiroshima years before, we know that it says for every person who died from a blast, another 4 would die later from the fallout, which was just radiation. Cancer will become prominent years later in these people who are exposed. So it left behind a trail, certainly. So our protection for our school children was to have them climb under their desks. Anyway, a family also built backyard fallout shelters, stocked them with canned food in the event that an atomic blast occurred. Okay, all right, and then the last set, we began the nuclear arms race. Most folks don't understand that the use of the atomic weapon leads to the use of nuclear weapons, which leads to the threat of nuclear war. And that really is the height of the Cold War, which is exactly what we're moving into here. So Truman orders the development of the H-bomb, which is a thermonuclear bomb. President Eisenhower then is elected in 1952. I believe he's a blank, yes. So you need to put him there. All right, and he's going to develop the Department of Defense and the CIA and the NSC, the Central Intelligence Agency, which monitors other nations and our intelligence information from those nations, and also the National Security Council. So here you see a lot of national security issues coming up. And then we have the Mideast crisis. Egypt is invaded by Britain and France to gain the Suez Canal, while we and the Soviets threaten to use missiles to protect Egypt's sovereignty. Nikita Khrushchev, another blank, orders the Soviet military into Hungary to stop democracy there. So you see this heightened, and I should say, threats of using nuclear weapons or missiles in these countries. The Eisenhower Doctrine, when we see Khrushchev take this step, is that Eisenhower says, we will defend the Middle East against communist aggression. We do not want the Middle East to fall to the communists. All right, and then the last little section is both sides agree or don't agree, but they both determine they're going to use technology to gain the upper hand in the arms race. And surely between us, the United States, and the USSR, we would develop this technology faster, right? Actually, no. So it says here, the Soviets developed the first true ICBM, that's Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, which can go from one continent to another and strike. Okay, they developed the first ICBM. On October 4th, 1957, the USSR launches Sputnik, which was the first satellite, it says here, into space. This set off great hysteria in the United States because the Russians are now in space, and can they shoot things at us from space? It just again heightened to this Cold War. So we become very scared. We increase our emphasis in our schools on math and science to generate mathematicians and astronauts and such that can kind of compete with the Soviet Union in the space race. NASA is formed, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, in 1958 as a result of Sputnik, and the space race thus begins. We also finally catch up in 58 by launching our first satellite. So you see, Sputnik goes up in 57, January 31st, 1958, we launch our first satellite, so we're not too far behind. All right, and lastly, Francis Gary Powers is shot down in 1960 in a U-2 spy plane we had created, and he shot down in the USSR, known as the U-2 incident. We end up having to give them someone we have in prison, someone we've convicted of Soviet espionage, and they give us Francis Gary Powers in return. They are furious, the Soviets are, that we're flying spy planes over their country. Khrushchev denounces this and tensions escalate.